Just because it's the film nobody asked for doesn't mean it can't be good, right? Right? Well, welcome to another Johnny Torch Reviews, and today we're going to take on the exasperating film Madam Web. And this is one that I was originally going to see in theaters, and honestly, it just didn't sound so great from what I heard about it, so I decided to give it a pass. But now on DVD it comes, and yours truly is going to check it out. And in fact, I have checked it out. And oh boy, where do I start here? I don't think this is an awful film. It's certainly not the worst film I've ever seen. So I'm always reluctant when, something like Morbius came out to get on the hate bandwagon because I actually enjoyed Morbius. I thought the last act kind of let it down a little bit, but it was a good solid film given the subject matter. It's a little more difficult here because I'm not quite sure anybody was asking for this film. Madam Web, of course, is a character that's kind of difficult to put into a solo film. And this film doesn't really do her any favors, taking her back to her origin, which I'm not sure anybody knows her origin in the comics. I mean, to be honest, my recollection of Madam Web goes back to the animated series, which is where I think a lot of Spider-Man fans first heard of Madam Web. And she was played, of course, by Stan Lee's wife, Joan Lee. And she was a big part of that show, so it wasn't surprising that they were going to try to utilize her in some way in live action. But again, bringing her in as the subject of her own film and not having really any strong ties to Spider-Man was a questionable idea at best. Uh, Again, this is going to be a spoiler review. I don't suppose I really need to do a spoiler-free portion of this review. Uh, I think if you were going to see this film, you've already seen it, and if you're not going to see it, I don't think you're going to care to hear the spoilers. But we're going to get deep into the spoilers. So if you haven't seen the film and you want to go in unspoiled, you've been warned. Now, to be honest with you, I wasn't trying to stay away from spoilers, and I still didn't really expect a lot of stuff in this film, particularly the beginning where we start with Madam Web's mother, who is for lack of a better term, a spiderologist. She somehow is looking for spiders in the Amazon, and we meet the villain, who is Ezekiel, which, again, I'm not too sure. I remember the character Ezekiel from the J. Michael Straczynski run, I want to say in the late 90s, maybe the early 2000s. He did a run on Spider-Man where he had Ezekiel as a villain, and it introduced a lot of weird concepts that I wasn't crazy about, so I kind of didn't stick with it for very long. A lot of the concepts really weren't that great going into the 2000s. I kind of bowed out on a lot of comics, and I think it was around that era when I kind of stopped reading Spider-Man. But they kind of try to throw the mystical mumbo jumbo aspect at Spider-Man and try to say that he was somehow destined, and there was all kinds of you know uh, Spider-Man before him or whatever. And that's where we pick up with this film, where Madam Web's mother is looking for some kind of mystic spider, some kind of magical spider, I suppose, for lack of a better term, that's out there in the Amazon. The villain, Ezekiel, ends up killing her while she's 9 months pregnant with Madam Web. And she's taken in, and he takes the spider, this magical spider that they're looking for. And these spider cult type characters come out of the woodwork, which was very strange and very surprising to me that they went there. This is kind of where the movie, I don't want to say it lost me so soon, but again, it's a really strange thing. when you're trying to compare this to the Spider-Man lore. This doesn't feel like it has anything to do with Spider-Man. If you took out what later on we'll talk about some of the characters from the original Spider-Man story that they sort of just tacked into the screenplay. Without that brief appearance of those characters, you wouldn't really even know this was a Spider-Man adjacent project. But these Spider-Man characters nurse Madam Web's mother through a childbirth so that Cassandra is born, and then she promptly dies. And we flash forward to what the film is set in 2003, which, again, this film has the marks of a lot of rewrites, that it went through a lot of probably post, while the film was being worked on, at least, changes to the script. And you could tell at some point they decided to focus less on Spider-Man as the subplot and have it more to do with, because I think this was going to be in some ways a prequel to, probably in their mind, the Tom Holland Spider-Man, by setting it in 2003. And of course, eventually, it doesn't really seem to make any sense what era you begin this film, because it seems like it has nothing to do with Spider-Man. Why set it in 2003? But anyway, so we meet Cassandra Kane. What is it? Cassandra Kane, I believe is her name. Let me take a look. Well, I don't got it in my notes, but anyway, she's a emergency ambulance officer, a paramedic, and she's working with Ben Parker. Yes, that Ben Parker, the famous uncle of Peter Parker. And I go by. I don't think anybody really knows what Ben Parker did for a living. I just go by the Sam Raimi film where he was an electrician that got laid off. Hence why he was hanging around the house a lot more often. But at least in this version, he is a paramedic worker as well. And the start of the film is very slow and rocky. The Sony Spider-Man Spider-Verse films, the Spider-Man adjacent films, so to speak, they tend to start strong and they kind of unravel by the end. This is kind of what I felt about Morbius. Definitely a Venom, Let There Be Carnage, where it kind of like in the last act, they're like, oh, let's just have some big to do with the hero and the villain. But this film kind of lost me at the beginning because Cassandra is not very likable. She's actually pretty much like a jerk. And I guess the idea was to sort of try to have her grow into the superhero role. Some kid wants to give her a drawing because she saved his mother or something, and she's like, acts like it's poison for some reason. I don't understand it, but she comes across very cold and kind of like a jerk. And her sort of relationship with Ben Parker is he's kind of the only person that's kind of, on friendly terms with her. Ben Parker, of course, is like hinting around that he's met a girl. Of course, they never mention May, Aunt May, of course, it's going to be. And we meet his sister-in-law, played by Emma Roberts, who is, of course, Mary Parker, and she's expecting Peter Parker, though they never say his name. Again, in a very odd kind of couching of this background of Peter Parker, his name is never even mentioned. So the thrust of the film is that Ezekiel, this villain, and again, he was one of the worst parts of the film too. So the very early scenes in the film where we learn about him, and he's like, I don't know, he's romancing this undercover agent or something, and we try to hear a little of his backstory, which is he's having nightmares because he's got like this precognizance from the spider bite, which I guess is their take on the spider sense, where he knows that three women dressed as spiders are going to kill him someday. And so his whole obsession is to find these three girls who are going to kill him someday and kill them first. Again, this sounds like something that I think they threw in like at the end of the day, because I think originally the plan was probably that he was going to kill young Peter Parker, and they were like, well, no, we really can't do that. Let's make it these three Spider Girls, which I don't remember their names. I know there was The second Spider Woman was played by the current It girl, Sydney Sweeney, which, if you're looking for her to look attractive in this film, you're going to be disappointed because she looks great as Spider Woman. But again, this was something that a lot of people had problems with and complained about, was the the girls in costume last literally a 30-second flashback, or flash forward, I suppose, as it were. They're not even really in costume in this film proper. It's just these visions that he's seeing of someday they'll get in costume and they're gonna mess him up and apparently kill him. I don't know the characters' names. There's Celeste O'Connor, Isabella Marced, and Sydney Sweeney. But they play these different versions of Spider Women that are going to, and it kind of, it sets you off on the wrong path, because you think originally what's going to happen is Madam Web is going to be sort of like getting her Charlie's Angels together, and these three Spider Girls are going to learn under her, and they're going to become Spider Women, and they're going to be able to get the bad guy at the end. And none of that really happens. Nothing really important happens to these characters other than Madam Web sort of learning about her powers and so forth. So at a certain point, she falls in the ocean trying to save someone, and this manifests her Spider Woman powers, her Madam Web powers, where now she's uh, precognizant as well, and she can see the future in short little bursts, which again is an interesting concept, but it kind of, I don't necessarily want to say it kind of gets old, but it feels like I kind of wonder what the replayability would be for this film, because you have to sit through many times where she's trying to figure out, she's on the subway and there's like a flash forward to her, and then she finds out it's a flash forward, and then she sees another one, and it kind of like, kind of gets tiring after a while. But eventually she gathers these three girls because Ezekiel is going to kill them. She kind of gathers them under her wing, and again, it feels like they. It's like, I remember saying The Marvels was a try hard movie. It kind of feels the same way with this movie, where it feels like they really wanted to do something here, and I could see the potential, but they really didn't have a game plan, really, so to speak, a game plan, because, well, she's trying to protect the kids. The kids don't know her from Adam. So Sydney Sweeney's character says, she's trying to kidnap us. Um, Celeste's character is sort of the, streetwise kid or whatever. She's kind of like uh, she's trying to, she with a skateboard and everything. Anyway, so, and then we have the other girl, which is sort of like living on her own, and we get all these backstories at some point to sort of humanize them. But basically, it's just like the tough kid, the loner, and the nerd. And basically, she takes these girls under her wing to get them away from Ezekiel, but the police think that she's kidnapping them, and she steals a taxi cab. And it feels like there's a lot of unnecessary difficulty added into the script. Like, if she wasn't thought of being a kidnapper, maybe this would have flowed a little bit better. Because at some point, we know she has to go back to Peru, where her mother uncovered this whole secret, where she got these powers and so forth. And it just feels like, well, all of a sudden she has to leave them high and dry to go to Peru, because that's where the story sort of beckons that they go. If they could have got rid of the weird spider cultists, the spider village or whatever, or if they could at the very least have maybe made it more organic on the relationship with her and these girls, because like at one point she's like wants to just dump them off and give them to somebody else, let the police take care of them or whatever, and then she was like literally going to run out on them at least on two occasions, and then she comes back and she wants to try to guide them and guard them and so on and so forth. But it feels like there's just like no clear path to this relationship with them. And I think that that's kind of where the film has its problems with it being sort of very jumbled and trying to get them all on the same page. They finally come to respect her, I guess, because she actually gets to the point of saving their lives. The villain, again, I think one of the points is the villain, which is Ezekiel, which is played by this actor, uh, Tahar Rahim, and he he does all his line readings as if he's ordering something at the deli. There really is not much excitement about him. There's not a lot threatening about him. I described him as looking like a bland version of broken Matt Hardy. If you're a wrestling fan, you might get the reference, but he doesn't really seem to be awe-inspiring. There's no real explanation why he's wearing a Spider-Man costume. He's wearing like a black Spider-Man costume. Um, you know, putting two and two together, you kind of imagine it's because he's gotten these powers from a spider, but it looks too much like the original Spider-Man costume to be a coincidence. And this is supposedly taking place before Peter Parker is born and so forth. So it's like, again, a very convoluted storyline there. So she goes to Peru and finds the spider village of the spider people or whatever. And they do that whole connecting with a dead loved one thing. Like, it started with Black Panther and it became a craze basically. We've seen it again in Blue Beetle, where these guys reconnect with their fathers in the afterlife. And it's sort of is the same thing here. She uses her powers to sort of see what her mother was going through. And she realizes that her mother was not putting her at risk by going to the Amazon 9 months pregnant. She was doing it in order to find a cure for a genetic disease that Cassandra was going to be born with. And so there's the reconciliation and everything, which is nice. But again, it feels like they took a long way to get there when it really didn't feel like it needed to be that complicated. Uh, so basically, the reason why I say that I think that the film kind of I started pulling for it to really get good in the last act because sort of again like what I said about the Marvels, my favorite part here in the film is sort of when they're on the same page and they're finally trying to work as a team. And she's trying to teach them how to do CPR and stuff because of course she's a paramedic and I guess in case she gets injured in this whole process. And it feels like, well, all right, they're kind of coming together to be a team. Again, there's still no costumes or anything. I don't know if they naively thought that this was going to get a sequel and maybe we would see that. To me, it looks like it's very much played as a one-off with like the hint of, Sony having hopes and dreams that they would use Madam Web somewhere in a Tom Holland film or something. But I don't know how realistic those plans were. I think by the time the film, I'm sure by the time filming was over that Dakota Johnson wanted no more, and I think they probably saw the writing on the wall, so to speak. But it launches into this big finale where again they try to tie in Ben Parker and Mary Parker as she's going to be giving birth to Peter Parker, and that like sort of complicates things because uh, Madam Web is trying to get them to the hospital at the same time, warding off the bad guy from the three girls. And that's kind of, again, that's kind of just tacked in just to say that it has something to do with Spider-Man. Because really, that scene really is brief and has really no impact whatsoever. The big showdown happens because Madam Web thinks that's a good idea to use, I guess it's a firework factory as sort of the battleground because she can use fireworks as a weapon against Ezekiel, which they do to various levels of success. And again, I feel like for what it is, it's not horrible, but it's not really something like I don't know if people compare it. One of the things I said was good about it is I think also that the cinematography is actually very good. I don't notice things like that in an action movie. You should be focused on the action. You really shouldn't be focused on, well, those camera angles were just peachy. But they do have some fun with the camera angles and the effects of she's looking into the future and she's not looking into the future, and the villain is framed a certain way. I did notice that stuff as being different than the typical action film. They didn't film it quite that way. They got a little clever. I'm giving them credit for that. But it doesn't really feel like this is something that, I would revisit too often. And that's kind of the problem, like I said, with the CW shows. I think it's comparable to the CW shows in that way, where I enjoyed it for the time it took to watch it, but I really don't see anybody going back to this one. And I'm sure I forgot most of it already by now, and it's been like 24 hours. There really isn't like a whole lot to this story. And I feel like if they didn't make it so complicated, there could have been even less. I mean, this could have been like maybe an hour and a half movie or an hour and 15 minutes, and you probably still would get the gist of it. Um, I think they have a scene in Grand Central Station, which I wanted to point out only because I think this is the first superhero film since Superman in 1978 to show Grand Central Station. And I seen that. I was like, wow, I recognize this place, right? Isn't that where Otis was getting followed by the detectives there? Armus and Harry. Well, anyway, again, not much to say about the ending. They sort of wrap it up uh neatly, where Cassandra goes underwater, and as fate would have it, she taught them CPR for a reason, because they rescue her and resuscitate her and bring her back for the, I guess, third time in her life. She has a near death experience, and now this time she's blind, which I guess I missed something watching it, because I don't really remember exactly what caused her to go blind. Maybe it was one of the fireworks. I don't really remember. I just remember her falling into the ocean and she comes out, and when they revive her, she's blind. And that's sort of her, her power, so to speak, sort of like Daredevil. She loses her sight, but she still has second sight. And so that's her power going forward. And she wears the big goofy glasses at the end, which are completely, you know, completely goofy looking. And they end it with Ben Parker and Mary Parker had a successful delivery. Of course, they still don't mention Peter Parker's name, but we know that he is alive and well and healthy, and will someday take on the mantle that these girls, I guess, are going to take before him. Not exactly sure. And the film ends with that future gaze that she has looking at the girls, and they're going to be fully trained, which would have been a more exciting movie, I guess, than this, where they're in their costumes and they're fighting crime. And it looks like, I think, the Spider Woman, the Sydney Sweeney one, looked like she was fighting the guy that shot Uncle Ben. I could swear that was the same actor, older, of course, but I'm probably wrong. But it looks like they got an actor who looks just like that guy. And I was wondering if that was supposed to be some kind of homage, that she was going to go after that guy someday after Uncle Ben gets killed. I don't know. But again, what can I say? I mean, it was the movie that nobody really asked for. Nobody really asked for a solo Madam Web film, and on that basis, I guess they did the best they could with that material. I mean, Dakota Johnson, she's pretty enough. She's a decent actress. I mean, not a whole lot is required of her. Like I said, she kind of goes through the character arc of being kind of a jerk at the beginning, and then being kind of tender-hearted to her charges by the end of the film. Again, like I said, the other kids kind of play the stereotypical characters that are given to them. Like I said, the tough girl, the nerd, the loner. So the performances are all right on that, and on that score. I think the villain, like I said, was kind of lacking. It felt like, to be honest with you, it felt like English wasn't his first language, and they kind of just dubbed his dialogue on top of it, because there's a lot of times where it looks like it's not kind of in sync. And I think that's also a telltale sign when the performance is not that emotive. Usually that's what it is. It's because that's not really the language they're comfortable in. I could be mistaken. I don't know. Maybe the guy's speaks English as well as the king. I don't know, but I was given that impression, so to speak. So I will give Madam Web 2.5 stars out of 5. I think I'm being a little generous giving it an extra half a star. 2 stars usually means that, like, I probably won't revisit this one that often. I mean, by comparison, I gave The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield 2 stars, and I don't really care for that film too much. Was it worth buying? Yeah, I guess. Was it worth checking out? Yeah. But I don't know if it's gonna have that replayability. I don't know that I would really, you know, I would not really hunger for another film in the series. But again, they could do something with this, I guess, in a sequel. If by some miracle it gets a sequel, they could really do something interesting with the three Spider Women, with Madam Web now in control of her powers and stuff. You kind of have to get past the origin in order to get to a more exciting second film. But the trick is, did you make enough money with the first film to get you to a second film? And in this case, it's probably unlikely. Let me see. I would give this one I guess, a C on the A to Z listings, and I guess maybe 6 out of 10 if you go by the 1 to 10 scale. So, so did Madam Web snare you into her web? Let me know in the comments below. And until next we meet, this is Johnny Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.